coming today to our service of remembrance of September 11th, 2001. Thanks for coming to be together. We've been away for a whole summer together, so I know that as you came in today, it was great to see faces that you haven't seen in a few months. For those of you who've been traveling up north, welcome home. And we hope that you enjoy the fall season together. We're remembering that tragic day that friends and loved ones, fellow employees, first responders, airline crew, and military members had their lives taken from them in a heinous and barbaric act of terrorism. On that day, the country came to a sudden halt. For many of us who carry a recollection of that day, it was catastrophic, and it confirmed that our worst fears could be realized. Furthermore, it also created wounds that we are still healing from after 22 years. But in the aftermath of that unthinkable day, the American spirit began to rise in a way no one had imagined. We relied on each other for support. We put aside our differences, and we joined together to do everything we could to help those brave first responders and to help all those others. We all came together on that dark day, and for that we will always remember. Now, last year we had our first service of remembrance. And it was shocking to see and hear how many of our own friends and neighbors had suffered a personal loss in connection with this day. And so we're having another service of remembrance today. And we'll keep doing it. We'll just keep doing it. We're together. And while we're here, there will be a time for reflection for all of us, for prayer, finding strength in the moment that injured us and wounded the soul of our nation. Wounds are what you receive when you stand for liberty, freedom, and the right to pursue happiness. What holds us together as a country are not always just the joys, but it's the injuries that we endure, the scars that we carry, and the sacrifices we pay to keep freedom alive. So despite what you may hear in the news, the entire world needs us to stay free so that they might have some hope. Before the service, most of you filled out a little card answering the question, where were you on 9/11? Here's some of the answers. Barksdale Air Force Base, Bossier City, Louisiana. Working for the FBI in southern France. Home in Miami Shores, watching the Today Show. Thank God my husband was home on Long Island and not at his office downtown. I was in London. I took a day to find out my family in New York City were okay. It took 2 weeks to get back home. And the English people were absolutely wonderful to us. I was in California, at home. I was on a plane bound for a conference in Florida. We left Philadelphia at 8 o'clock in the morning and came down in Atlanta. I was on my way to a staff meeting at work, and by the end of the meeting, the second tower had hit. I was in Italy. I was in New York City on 9/11. I was awakened by my husband on his way to work in San Jose, California. He heard it on the radio and called our son, who came to wake me up and tell me to turn on the TV. I was working in Coral Springs as a sales manager. In my high school classroom, trying to understand why my students weren't in the room. They were watching the news footage on TV. I was at the corner of 37th and Park Avenue. I was driving to work in Massachusetts. I was at my office in Charlotte, North Carolina. I was in Warren, Michigan, getting physical therapy. I was in Rochester, Michigan. I was working at the office in the hospital. New Haven, Connecticut. Aden, Yemen. I was at home glued to the TV. Long Island. I was at a golf game. I was working as a physical therapist in my home in Minnesota. I was at the Martin Memorial Cancer Center. I was in my office just after returning from my honeymoon the night before. Manchester, UK, on my way to work in Norwalk. And I was at the Navy Recruiting Command in Memphis, Tennessee. Those are our voices. That's where all of us were somewhere when everything came to a halt. Today our guest speaker is Mr. Stephen Corbett. He was a supervisory special agent, now retired, with the Navy Criminal Investigative Service, also known as NCIS. To me, he's Gibbs. He also was a supervisory agent working with the FBI. He will describe some of the events that unfolded while he was on duty overseas, and he'll describe his story later. Afterward, I've set up a few microphones here, and I have a wireless as well for the bag, so that if you would like to have a moment just to share your thought of what you gained, not necessarily what happened at 9/11 for you, but maybe words of hope of what you have learned and gained from that moment in 2001, to serve as a word of encouragement for all of us to keep the fight, to stay hopeful, to remain as a country of free people who love each other, who care for each other, and stand with each other in times of distress. Those 19 terrorists, they smuggled box cutters and knives through the security section at 3 East Coast airports, at Boston, at Dulles, and in Newark, New Jersey. They boarded 4 early morning flights. They were bound for California. They chose those because they were going to be loaded with fuel for a long transcontinental journey. And soon after the takeoff, the terrorists commandeered these 4 planes. They took over the controls, and they transformed ordinary passenger jets into guided missiles. They were on 4 flights: American Airlines Flight 11, United Airlines Flight 175, American Airlines Flight 77, and United Airlines Flight 93. At the World Trade Center, 2,763 people died after the 2 planes slammed into the Twin Towers. That figure includes the 343 firefighters and paramedics, 23 New York City police officers, 37 Port Authority police officers who were struggling to complete an evacuation of the buildings and save the office workers trapped on the higher floors. At the Pentagon, 189 people were killed, including the 64 on American Airlines Flight 77. On Flight 93, 44 people perished when the plane crash-landed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. New York City's economy alone lost about 143,000 jobs a month later, and $2.8 billion in wages were lost in the first 3 months after 9/11. The heaviest losses were, of course, in finance and air transportation, which accounted for 60% of those lost jobs. The estimated cost of the World Trade Center damage has only been guessed at as $60 billion. The cost to clean the debris at Ground Zero was $750 million. In the aftermath, thousands of first responders and people working and living in lower Manhattan near Ground Zero were exposed to toxic fumes and particles emanating from the towers as they burned and fell. We've cared for them the best that we could, but by at least that we know from 2018, at least 10,000 people were diagnosed with a 9/11 related cancer. Well, you know I'm a preacher, and I'm not going to co-opt our service. It's a cooperative service for the whole community. But a few verses struck me today. One of them was from Psalms 127, verse 2. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the guards stand watch in vain. And from Psalm 140, David prays this prayer. Rescue me, Lord, from evildoers. Protect me from the violent, who devise evil plans in their hearts and stir up war every day. They make their tongues as sharp as a serpent's. The poison of vipers is on their lips. Keep me safe, Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Protect me from the violent, who devise ways to trip my feet. I say to the Lord, you are my God. Hear, Lord, my cry for mercy. Lord, you are my strong deliverer. You shield my head in the day of battle. Do not let their plans succeed. I'm going to do something now. It's called a two-bell ceremony. We do this on ships from time to time. A two-bell ceremony, the ship rings two bells usually at the end of a routine day on board a ship. When they ring the two bells, it's usually a time for quiet, what we call tattoo. And then soon taps would sound, and it was the most appropriate time to honor our departed shipmates. So if you'll just take a moment, let's bow your heads. Bow your head with me. The toll of the ship's bell reminds us of the reverence we owe to our departed victims, first responders, and to those who guard the honor of our country. Let this moment be a reminder of the faith they confide in us. Let us not forget our obligations, and in silence, breathe a prayer for those now absent. This moment of reverence we dedicate to the memory of those on American Airlines Flight 11. American Airlines Flight 77. United Airlines Flight 175. United Airlines Flight 93. The World Trade Center. The New York Fire and Rescue Department. The New York City and Port Authority Police Department. Those military and civilians working in the Pentagon. And for all those who have not been named, but are now remembered in our hearts. Would everyone take a moment and stand with me as we sing together our national anthem? And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today our guest speaker, Mr. Stephen Corbett. Stephen.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation, Gary. For those of you who don't know me, I've been described as, well, and I like the way I was introduced, or they said to me, a couple of women did, "You're the guy married to the woman who's in the chapel choir." Very proud of that. I'm going to give you an appreciation for an investigation. We were involved, NCIS and the FBI were involved in the investigation, not in the United States, but overseas. It was a very hostile environment, but that changed. But first I have to give you some background. We all remember December 7th, 1941, 22 November 1963, 11 September 2001. But do you remember 12 October 2000? Why that's significant? What happened on that day? The USS Cole was attacked in the port of Aden, Yemen. 17 sailors died. Let me just tell you that the ship's crew saved that ship. You just can imagine the stories that came out of with the chief who had 2 broken legs, scaling the ladder, trying to get his crew members out. People swimming through burning oil. They saved the ship. The CO also did a miraculous thing. What he did, instead of having the bow of the ship facing toward the shoreline of downtown Aden, he wanted it pointed outwards toward Aden Harbor, outside Aden Harbor to the Indian Ocean, just in case he had to get out quick. Well, that mere act saved the ship, because instead of hitting the galley, if the ship had been turned in the other direction, it would have hit the ammunition compartment. And that ship would have blown apart. And more people would have died. After the attack, none of us remember where we were. I was at NCIS headquarters. We arranged for the deployment of agents to go into Yemen. They deployed with the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force out of New York City. They arrived in Aden, Yemen, not with open arms from the Yemenis. Instead, when the plane landed, when the C-130 landed, they were surrounded by Yemeni soldiers with AK-47s. The agents, forensic technicians, were on board the C-130, but they also had Marines. Marine captain came back. When he told them what was out there, he said, lock and load. The compartment came down, the door came down, the Marines came out, the Yemenis disappeared. We then went to the harbor. They started their investigation. I should also add that there were a number of things that were done that day. Air Force medical team out of Ramstein. They said it was the largest medevac they've ever had. They took 37 injured, 17 dead sailors to Ramstein. The investigative findings. In December, after the attack, we were making some inquiries. The Yemenis arrested El-Quso, Badawi, Musad, Salala, and El-Sariri as being responsible for the attack. Also, others were El-Sariri, Benatash, Khalad. We started the crew members, interviews of the crew members who had been conducted both while they were on the ship and also at Ramstein. Let me tell you a quick story about Ramstein. Ken Brewer, NCIS agent, ran to Ramstein, and he interviewed the woman whose body was burnt, about 80% of her body. She swam through the burning oil. Ken walked up to her, asked her 2 questions. 1, can you hear me? 2, do you have anything significant that would help us in our investigation? She nodded. I can hear you. No, I can't provide any information. As Ken walked away, he heard a gurgling sound. The nurse called Ken back, concerned that he didn't want to provide her with any infection. He got closer and closer. And what she said to him was, get them. Ken flew back. Agent in charge, John O'Neill, was in Aden, Yemen at the time. I'll talk a little bit more about John. But John recognized he had a personality that would just to make you want to work for him. But I'll tell you, being in Yemen, it's not the best place. If anybody wants a timeshare, I got one to sell. So, anyways, John recognized the significance of what Ken had heard and learned. Motivation was starting to dip a bit. And he told Ken to brief the NCIS agent and FBI agents as to what the young sailor had told him. And John told everybody, that's why we're here. President Saleh, you mentioned the arrest. President Saleh of Yemen had already made a statement. Subjects were going to be turned over to the U.S. There's not going to be no rendition. They're going to stay right here. He said they're suspects. They're not convicted of a crime. January 2001. Interviews with the suspects are going to start. As background, as I said, I was at NCIS quarters when the bombing occurred. A friend of mine, who I went to college with, we were both local cops together, and then we were with NCIS together. I was scheduled to be transferred to Hawaii. He asked, would I go there for 60 days for the interviews of the suspects? Sure. When I looked at my visa, I said 17 March. I said to Mark, I don't want to be in Yemen on St. Patrick's Day. Nevertheless, day after Christmas of 2000, I was in Aden, Yemen. We were preparing to interview the suspects. Suspects all readily admitted they were involved in the attack. They had nothing to fear. They weren't going to be leaving the country. Solid wasn't going to allow it. Investigative jurisdiction. I tell you this because this is going to change when it comes to 9/11. The word jurisdiction, the word prosecution is going to have a whole different meaning. FBI New York, very successful, the JTTF. U.S. Attorney's Office, responsible for any Al-Qaeda investigation, had recently been successful in the prosecution of those responsible for the bombing in Nairobi, Kenya, the U.S. Embassy. As a result, any case that had to do with Al-Qaeda was going to be operated, investigative-wise, FBI, JTF New York. They had the responsibility. Interviews. We interviewed the crew members, and as we interviewed the crew members, we learned something new. I mentioned the attack in October on the USS Colt. But one thing we learned was January 2000. Members of the community told us, oh, there was a boat over here outside the harbor that was stuck in the mud. And inside that small boat, they said, were bricks. Well, you can all suspect what the bricks were. Those bricks in 2000, January 2000, was C4. What happened was, the USS Sullivans had come into Aden Harbor to refuel. And the boat, the attackers didn't plan on low tide. So the boat got stuck in the mud. Right? They were not able to launch. So Sullivan's was an attack, but the boat stayed in the mud. So we're staying, as we talked to the interviewers, the community members, they said, yeah, they had the bricks there. As I mentioned to you before, Yemen is a different place. This is a country that people don't know their age. They're not wearing shoes. They don't know how old they are. Okay? When you turn 16, you get a gun. Okay? Land disputes. They're not just handling in the court. They throw grenades at one another. So, in this case here, John O'Neill recognized, hey, we need to find what does C4 look like. So take a community, or take a country like Yemen, the mindset, and take Washington, D.C. So John says, send me a picture of C4. Picture comes back from Washington of what C4 looks like. What do you think we received? From Washington, D.C. The chemical formula of what C4 looks like. Okay? John, in a very colorful manner, has said, I'm dealing with people that don't know when they were born. They don't wear shoes here. Send me a picture of C4. He sends a picture of C4, and of course, later on we identified that's the explosives that were in the boat. Suspect interviews. When we're interviewing those 5 individuals, we learned that Claude and Nashiri were the ones, they were lieutenants in Al-Qaeda, had come to Yemen to recruit, especially Claude. Claude had recruited Badawi. Badawi then recruited Kuso and others. Their job, this is before the Sullivans are now, this is 1999 when they wanted to carry out the attack. Their job was to carry out an attack on a U.S. warship coming to Yemen. Now, bin Laden knew what he was doing. He had ties to Yemen. His 4th wife was Yemeni. He knew what he was doing in regards to Yemen. If he attacked the ship in the port of Yemen, it would ruin their economy. In fact, make a long story short, what happened after the attack on Yemen? Lords of London had told, Yemen was that port in which a number of ships would go, when they're coming from the Indian Ocean down to the Red Sea, would exchange cargo and go back to locations. Lords of London had said, if another ship goes into the port of Aden, we will not insure you. So you can just imagine what it did to the economy of Yemen. So he said, Badawi and Kuso got recruited. We're sharing all our findings, not only with the Yemenis, but with other members of the intelligence community. Okay? We're not hiding anything. In March, bin Laden announces that Al-Qaeda was responsible for the attack on the Cole. During our interviews, there were a number of things that popped up, but two things I'm going to bring to your attention. One was kind of humorous, but again, the mindset. Ali Safan, if you haven't seen him on TV, fabulous interviewer, knows a lot about Al-Qaeda. He and John O'Neill had given us all great insight in regards to the organization. Ken Ruhr, Ali Safan, and a Yemeni are interviewing Badawi. Now, the way the interview was conducted is we would have one room, and then Badawi would be in another room with a door cut out. And the interview questions either went through from Ken to a Yemeni, one of their, what they call political security organization, that was the equivalent of their CIA, had to go through that person to be asked at Badawi. Well, you can imagine that broke down real quick when he asked questions directly to Badawi. Well, Ali, a very shrewd interviewer, is asking him, Badawi, a number of questions. And Ken missed a question, and he just said, he wrote to Ali, and he said, he was asking, what did he say? Ali took that and turned to Badawi and said, you're lying. Okay? And then he said, pointing to Ken, Ali pointed to Ken and said, he's a human lie detector. He can tell when you're lying. Okay? And what happened was, Badawi's looking over at him, and then what happened was, Ali would ask Ken, can you see him? Each time Badawi was asked a question, he would back up. And what? So Ken couldn't see him. So he would go back and say, I can't see him. And Ali would say, you're lying. Right? Badawi gave up a lot of information. Not a good piece of information. Very valuable piece of information. We're interviewing Kuso. Kuso tells us he took money to Claude, to another country. Who was in another country? That seemed odd to us. You mean Claude gave money to you and you brought it into the country? No. I took money from Yemen and gave it to him in another country. That seemed very strange to us. Again, we're very focused on the Cole attack. Just made a note of it. Right? Well, why did you take the money, we asked. Well, I think it was because of Claude's prosthesis. He lost his leg during the Soviet-Afghan war. Okay. Just made note of it. May 2001. So I mentioned to you before, there was a fatwa in regards to attack on us, the investigative team. We're staying in a hotel. We've relocated twice already. We're staying in a hotel in Elephant Bay. We learned that there are 3 members of Al-Qaeda are going to orchestrate an attack against us. Now, I can't say we were really that worried because we got FBI, we got NCIS agents, we got SWAT team members from the FBI, and we had the Marines there. Right? So I think we were pretty secure where we were. The only problem was our interviews were conducted at Yemeni headquarters, PSO headquarters, and we only had one route in and out. So it pretty much shut us down. As a result, in May, the team relocated from Aden to Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. We had to readjust, do security assessments in the hotels we were going to stay at, and so forth. We're getting ready to interview. We've asked the Yemenis to relocate the people down in Aden, Yemen, up to Sana'a. They were a little reluctant. They were a little reluctant about a number of things. September 11th, Tommy Donald, Supervisory Agent, my compatriot. We're on the phone with New York, FBI, outlining what we plan to do, discussing with them, here's our action plan, what we're going to do, ask the Yemenis, and interviews to be conducted. The agent on the other end says, I gotta go. A bomb's going off. Okay. Ali comes running in and says, a plane flew into the World Trade Center. Ambassador Bodine has left. Ambassador Hull is en route. Tommy and I go to the ambassador's office, one of the few offices that had a TV set. Turn on the TV set, and you all remember that clear day. Because we were thinking about the B-29 that flew into the Empire State Building. But you couldn't mistake flying into the World Trade Center. We watched that, and we saw the second plane fly into Talentum. We recognized this was no longer an accident. Went back, FBI New York, with the responsibility here, they had the con. They instructed us to leave and stage in Dubai. We're going to leave Sana'a, Yemen, and go to Dubai. You can just imagine what we were thinking. Right? It's not bad to sit in Dubai, but where we were going to go after that. Right? September 12th, we're sitting at the airport in Sana'a, Yemen. We get a call. The call is Tommy Donlin, Bob McFadden, NCIS, Ali Safan, and myself. Select 2 SWAT agents, go back to the embassy. Take a look at a photo. You remember I mentioned Kuso. Kuso was like a bad man. When we did our analysis, we found Kuso was involved in everything. He was there. He was there at the meetings. He was, as I mentioned, transporting money and so forth. Go back and see if Kuso's in a photo. And that was one of the things that was key in this investigation, was a photo array of all the suspects. We go back, we look at the photo. I mentioned Claude as a planner for the attack on Cole. Yep. Is that Kuso? No, that's Claude. Who's that? That's Middar. Who's that? El Hamzi. Who were they? They flew the planes into the World Trade Center, the Pentagon. Where are they? They're in the country where Kuso took the money. So now we've linked Claude and these 2 attackers to Al-Qaeda. We have a meeting the following day, on 12 September, with the Yemenis, with General Gamish. He's head of the Political Security Organization, as I mentioned earlier, the equivalent of CIA. If you remember the book, Herb Cohen, The Art of Negotiation, there were 3 factors: information, time, and resources. Okay? Well, we received information from the embassy that President Saleh had made a comment to some of his officials that once the Americans have finished in Afghanistan, they're coming to Yemen. Now we're going to go talk to Gamish. You can just imagine the position the small little group's in now. We got the time, we got the resources, and we got the info. So we sit down with Gamish. And Ali, I'll never forget it, Ali had said to him, either you're with us or you're not. And you gotta tell us now whether you're gonna support us, because we're gonna go back to Washington and tell him. Garmisch says, what do you want? We want Badawi and Kuso sent from Aden up here. We want to interview them. And we want John Dell. Who's John Dell? John Dell was bin Laden's bodyguard. Came to Yemen to visit his family. Yemen. Being arrested in Yemen, everybody remembers the movie Casablanca. At the end of the movie, Captain Reno, when he says, round up the usual suspects. That's pretty much like what Yemen is. They lock you up. They can just throw away the key. They lock you. They don't need a reason. So they locked up John Dell. We knew he had him in custody. We wanted to talk to him, since he was bin Laden's bodyguard. Talked to Badawi and Kuso. We got the photos. El Hamdi, Mihdar. They don't recognize them. They don't know who they are. John Dell, Ali does an excellent job in doing the interview. The interview that we conducted wasn't a waterboarding. There was no torture. There was just a comparison of the Quran. Okay? And we also used the local Yemeni newspaper. Not the best qualified newspaper. Because one of the articles, and again, John Dell was Yemeni, the newspaper reflected 200 Yemenis died in the attack. And we used that. After about the 5th day, John Dell says, the Sheikh must have gone mad. That was the clue. That was it. We knew he switched. John Dell started providing us information such as bin Laden's homes, transportation routes, his ammo locations, communication sites, and other information. I'm sure anybody in the military out there recognizes the significance of this type of information. I'd gone down to being at the embassy, I'd gone down to the Defense Attaché's office, trying to get an appreciation for what the military plan of action was. And what the Defense Attaché told me, the DAT, abbreviation, DAT said, well, the government of Afghanistan, if they turn over bin Laden, there's going to be another form of diplomacy used. So I'm curious, what's that form of diplomacy? We're going to put steel on target. Interesting. Came back, sitting down talking to Tommy, and asked him about the reports we're now generating because of what John Dell's telling us. Prosecution, jurisdiction. Remember I told you it was going to change. Well, prosecution, jurisdiction, we're going to take the reports and we're going to give them to the Southern District. The Southern District's going to look them over because we're going to look at prosecution in regards to indicting Al-Qaeda members. From there, it's going to go back to Washington, and information's going to go back to DOJ and the FBI and so forth. So I sat down, talked to Tommy, and said, that's not good enough. What we're going to have to do, we got to get the information out to DOD because this information is used for target analysis. I give credit to where credit's due. Kenny Maxwell, an FBI supervisor, assistant special agent in charge back in New York. Tommy and I explained to him what was going on, what the military was planning. And Kenny said, well, I don't know, we got to brief that up to the SAC and the ADIC, and we got to go back to Washington and let them decide how we're going to release this information. Okay, Kenny, I'll wait till you come back. Came back, next day asked Kenny, what about it? What should we do? Kenny took a chance. He didn't brief it up the chain. It could have all went south for him, but what he did is he took a chance. He said, go, produce them. And what we did for the first time, the FBI never had IIRs produce. Never produced one. So we produce joint NCIS, FBI, intelligence information reports in regards to what John Dell was telling us. And the reason we were putting these out, and we told Kenny, we don't have all the answers because we don't know all the questions. And we need others to give us the questions that we need to ask John Dell. Well, you can just imagine, and these reports go out to the U.S. intelligence community worldwide. So it came back to us. You can just imagine the questions that we were receiving. I remember Ali looking at him saying, "This is a good question." The ambassador says, "You guys got readership." And Kenny said, "Don't wait for my permission again. Just keep them going." So you can just imagine we're getting questions. We're going to John Dell. We're writing reports, putting them out. It's about 12 to 14 hours a day, 7 days a week. Also, we can't interview John Dell during the daytime. The Yemeni said we can only interview him in the evening. So we had a motorcade down the evening at PSO headquarters. We're coming out, and I remember one evening, I saw the security guard. I remember I talked about the land disputes with grenades. We saw one of the security guards tossing a grenade up and down. Up and down. I mentioned to one of the other guards, I said, "You might want to tell him that thing could go off." He walks down, he comes back. He said he's got another one. I don't know how you can argue with that type of mentality. Anyways, John Dell gave us great information. That information led to, well, Secretary of State Powell put out a memo to all the ambassadors to have them to interact with the foreign ministers of the countries that the U.S. ambassadors were seeing in, to provide them with the information that the State Department had put together. A lot of that information came from the small little team in Aden, Yemen. Right? Now, it was important because, as President Saleh had told Ambassador Hull, and I assume he had told others, that Al-Qaeda wasn't responsible for the attack. They were blaming it on Israel. Right? So the report, information we were getting from John Dell was significant. And then it allowed Secretary of State Powell to put out a report that went to all the embassies. So then that perception changed. We were there until November, December. All right. The small little team, we leave in December of 2001. That 60-day period for myself, as I told you, I left the day after. I arrived in Yemen on the day after Christmas. I arrived back in the United States on Christmas Eve. Right. My household goods in my car enjoyed Hawaii. I didn't get to go. Anyways, we went back, and then Gitmo is established. My buddy, Mark Fallon, is now responsible, and was working with the Army to establish a interviewing team. The interviews commence down in Gitmo. FBI and NCIS drop out because of the torture techniques being used by the CIA. Right? But we start getting information. What are we going to do with it? Right? Secretary of the Navy said we're not going to be involved anymore. And then that changes. About 5 weeks ago, I got a call from the Army JAG officer. He said they're going to prosecute Nashiri. We talked about it a little bit. And he said they're going to it's probably going to start at the end of this month. 2003, indictments against Badawi and Kuso for the Ebola attack. Bin Laden, Khalad. DOJ issues the indictments. Yemeni charges Badawi, Kuso, Sariri, Nashiri is also tied. That's July. 2004. September, Badawi and Nashiri are sentenced to death. Kuso, 10 years. Salah and the others are sentenced to 5 years. Badawi's sentence is reduced to 10 years. He then escapes from prison. Kuso is out of prison. They're no longer with us. They were both killed by drone attacks. Ollie Safan left the FBI and now has his own company. Tommy Donlan went to work for the Homeland Security in the state of New Worked for Credit Suisse. Bob McFadden went to Deloitte after he retired. John O'Neill, God bless his soul. John O'Neill retired from the FBI and took the Director of Security job at the World Trade Center. He had the job for 2 weeks, okay, when the planes hit. Found his body next to a fire station. Just wanted to give an appreciation for what a small little group did, and also the collaboration between the organizations was critical here in regards to acquiring this information. I should also add, when we first arrived in Yemen, John O'Neill, as I said, they were surrounded by the Yemenis, but John's personality allowed them to recognize what we needed to do and to work with us to a degree. I ran over my time. Do you have any questions? If not, thank you very much.
That's a story that you will not hear in the news. And I want you to know that we've recorded our service today. It's not live streamed, but it's recorded, and so we'll have it on our chapel website, the link on YouTube, and you can view that at a later date. There were so many things that I wanted to write down and remember. I'm so glad we recorded it so we can see it again and catch all those details. I want to thank all those who had parts to play in making our service of remembrance today. Several of you have participated in either providing for our service or funding it. Someone has made our beautiful banner that we had. Thank you very much for that. And we just thank everybody here at Mariner Sands for your cooperation and how we do things together to remember things as important as this day. I'd like us to stand together, and if we could, we're going to do two things. We're going to just pause and say a brief prayer of a general nature, according to your faith traditions. And then we're going to sing. Jed is going to play a round of God Bless America. Okay, let's pray together. Almighty God, we pause to remember and reflect on a day unlike any other. Help us with this endeavor of remembering as we honor those who died on September 11th, 2001. May your Spirit provide strength and comfort, as well as peace, to the family and friends of the fallen. We also pray for those lost in the ensuing conflicts to defend our freedoms during the years of war since that day. Lord, continue to bring healing in the lives of family and friends, especially as we remember the principles their loved ones embraced: sacrifice, liberty, justice, honor, and duty. We ask for your grace and strength. And now bless our national, civilian, and military leaders today. Give them wisdom as they lead our great nation through prosperous as well as challenging times. Oh God, thank you for our great nation and the freedoms we enjoy as Americans. Help us to continue to protect our servicemen and our women, our civilians, and those who are deployed in the defense of freedom, those who are employed on the streets of our cities to keep us safe. We ask these things in your holy name, we pray. Amen. Jed, will you start us off with...